Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and assalamu alaikum. I'm sorry for coming in a few minutes late, but I would, because a very dear friend passed away last night in Lahore. And if you allow me, Athar Bhai and Mehvash and Ilona and Marianne, so I would like to dedicate this session to his memory because he was a major Marxist scholar and activist, Dr. Tanveer Gondal, who was popularly, fondly known as Lal Khan. And we, after this session, I'll leave for his funeral. So I'm very sorry for coming in late, but I don't want to begin on a sad note. But it is important to remember those who have dedicated their lives for the betterment of society and people and art and literature, because he was also a writer. So we've got Marianne from Austria. Very warm welcome. And we have Afshan, Shafi, Athar Tahir, Mehvash, Amin, and Ilona, Yusuf, a very august panel. And my name is Khalique, and I also happen to be a poet. So,
an August compare.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that's what you call Tehseen Bahami, because Athar Tahir is one of the most important and major poets in Pakistan today. Perhaps one of our, what you call the leading poets that we have. In any language, not just in English, and we are going to discuss that. So I begin with you, Athar Bhai. Why did you choose? Because you have a command over multiple languages, as I understand, and as I know. So why did you choose English, which is spoken by or understood by less than 2% of the population in Pakistan, as your primary medium of expression?
A one-liner on that, because I feel in that language. And emotions and sentiments are basically what make up poetry. So, because I feel in English, so I write in English.
Marianne, if I can ask you that you're also a multilingual poet, aren't you?
Yeah, one could say so, yes.
So, why in English, and what actually interested you in English verse?
I mean, it's quite similar to what the previous gentleman said, because, I mean, for me, English almost feels like a mother language, mother tongue, because we learned that in grammar school in Austria, and I'm really fond of languages in general, so whenever I go to a country, I try to, learn at least the most polite things to say, and for writing, I think every language opens up new worlds, and new colors and new sentiments, and I love to include different languages into my German texts, because I feel that it gives them more, they become more holistic, they become more interesting, and that's also how I think and feel. Like, I think in French sometimes, and I talk to myself in English sometimes, so
Right, and you write short poems.
I do write short poems, yes. I also write novels, that's like long, narratives, and also short stories. And yeah.
But does language affect the genre, or I mean, what is the relationship between if you you have different genres in which you express yourself? Then is there a choice of language with each genre, or it's just random?
I mix it all. Whatever fits, whatever feels right, whatever the story needs, basically.
So you write fiction in German and English, both?
Let's say I mainly write in German, but I use English, and I do translate with another translator from the US. I translate my own texts to English as well.
Afshan, what has been the experience of writing for you? When did you begin, and how do you feel about it, and where is it going for you?
Well, for me, it's always been a part of my life since I was 7 years old. So I was writing short poems, and I always found it to be kind of like a playmaking for me. I found that I loved playing with language and using different forms, and I just love how malleable English is. and I just found it a way to express myself completely.
Mehvash? Yes. So you're also an editor.
Yes, I am.
So how does that work? I mean, you see, sometimes I find it very difficult if you're a creative writer yourself to actually be an editor for other creative writers.
No, I would say the opposite. I think that if you do write yourself, you know, to begin with, I want to tell you that one has had a very fastidious kind of patronage by Toffee, Crawford and Kalimumar, who were my mentors when I was growing up, and they used to actually be very helpful in telling me to tear up things if they were not good, or to fix them, or to rewrite them. And in fact, Kalimumar used to come over all the time and, no, Mehvash, I think, you know, you need to take these two lines out and think how you can. He never tell me what to do, but he'd suggest that maybe this was weak. And also through the, you know, so I understand that whole process of either call it mentoring or of self-editing. All that has been very, very close to my experience. And so obviously when I become an editor, automatically I look at the same for some of the younger artists particularly. You know, last year we had a poet and who sent a poem for the LLF Review, which is our journal. And
which is being launched today.
Well, it's being launched tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
We've had 3 copies printed so far, and the 4th is coming up tomorrow. And he sent in a poem, and Ilona is aware of that, and we loved the poem, except that we felt it was going all over the countryside. I mean, that's putting it mildly. So both of us suggested to him that please, you know, contain it, and make it shorter, make it more succinct, or certain paragraphs were not necessary. And he was very miffed. And he said, I'm not going to write for you. But the next year, this year, he sent in a short story. And that was also a bit all over the place. He was a very young but very talented writer. So when I suggested certain changes to him, I actually changed his story around and I sent it back to him. And he was fine. So you know, yesterday I was at Musharraf's session, and this is the danger that I think a lot of young people face when they're writing initially, that they feel that everything that they've written is come from you know, heaven, and that they cannot touch it. And so this process has been actually very helpful to me, of being mentored by such great men, and making me realize that every word you spout or write down is not divine.
Yeah.
So
moving to Ilona. Ilona, you've actually written and worked on the evolution of Anglophone poetry in Pakistan. So you know, how did that evolution take place, for want of a better word? I mean, how did it grow, the English language verse in Pakistan?
So basically, all I've done is actually document it.
Yeah.
Because I found that a lot of young people that I talked to in the last 10, 12 years were not aware of the poets that came in the 60s and the 70s. Toffee, Crawford, Kalimumar, Athar Tahir, Maki Qureshi, who was our first female poet. A lot of people did not know their work. And I just started writing. I don't know how this started, actually. I think I was asked to write a review of something. Yeah, and it started from there.
With Blaine, I believe, no?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that's how it started. Yeah, with Blaine. We put together a special issue of a Canadian poetry magazine, which was a Pakistani issue. And the name of the journal is Valum. And it was a special issue of Pakistani poetry. So I guess that sparked it. And then I was asked to write reviews for some journals abroad, post-colonial writing and so on. So that's how I started documenting.
Right.
the
So,
writing.
I mean, do you see any changes taking place over the years, or we are using the same idiom, or?
Oh
there
no,
is-
it's much more modern. I feel that, because of, I guess also because of the internet, because the thing is that the internet has given you so much, a much wider range of poetry that you can access. Poetry from different countries, poetry in translation, which, like, it allowed you to access more modern poetry, and that's changed the way that people write, and changed the scope of your writing as well, the themes, which were very, like, much more bound by, let's say, what we call, because I don't like labels, the post-colonial kind of way you think. It's changed quite considerably.
Quite considerably.
May I come in here?
Please, please.
Just to add to what she's saying, I think your question is very relevant because we have to reiterate it every time we hold a session, whether in Islamabad, Lahore or Karachi, is because the younger generation is not aware of that grand tradition of Pakistani writing in English.
Yeah.
And having taught MPhil courses here in Lahore, I thought I'd put that in perspective for our audience. You see, when Pakistan became independent, you had two broad strains of writing in English. You had one strain which is represented by Zulfikar Ghosh, happily still alive, in a very advanced age, living abroad. What I call the native alien idiom. This is basically people who have left Pakistan, of Pakistani origin, and have become part of the diaspora. And they have a rootlessness about them. They have picked and chosen things from various societies they've lived in, and they have made successful works, whether poetry or prose or novel, from that. And then we have the other strand of Pakistani writing in English, which is represented by people like Toffee, Crawford, Kalimumar, Maki Qureshi, the first generation of
Daud
truly
Kamal.
Pakistani, Daud Kamal,
Yeah.
very important. So these first generation poets and writers were talking about being rooted, and they talked about and practiced the Pakistani idiom. That is the way in which English is used by Pakistanis. And that's a very strong strand as well. But what happened in the 90s is that suddenly, because of the computer coming in and internet and things like that, so you had a third strand of writing coming in, which, though it is rooted in a society, and though it is not diasporic, it has become universal. And people are writing even as they live and practice writing in this country, but they are aware of the larger issues of other countries. So you have a very happy blend of a modern idiom coming into play in the 1990s, in which they are rooted and yet they're not quite native aliens. You see what I mean?
So, no, it's very interesting, but I would like to ask you then, that what are your influences? I mean, again, a very sort of common question that people would put to you, but what have been your influences? Because I, as a poet myself, I find other language, poets in other languages influencing me more, who I have read in English or in Urdu or, other languages that we speak, Punjabi or Saraiki or Sindhi, influencing my sort of sensibility more than the English poets. So, I mean, how do you see that?
Well, it's bound to happen, you see, because the more you read and the more international your interaction is, the more influences you will succumb to or react against in your poetry. For me, the early poetry was basically the romantic, Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley. But soon one realized that the idiom was not quite relevant, and although the thoughts were, but the idiom wasn't. So one began to read more modern writers like Auden and
T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot, yes, a great deal. Spender, Wallace Stevens, Ezra Pound. And then one was introduced, you'll be surprised, by an Englishman to Toffee Crawford. I was actually told to go to him by my English teacher, who was a Britisher. And then one came to see the work of people like Toffee, Crawford, and that generation. So it's been a mixed sort of a influence. But then when you spread out, I mean, for example, Japanese poetry has had a great influence on my work.
Well, yes,
haiku,
one of your
tanka.
collections is also...
That's right, the tanka. And the influence of the sonnet has been very strong, something which I feel is a challenge for all of us, young and old and versatile writers, that you must learn to write within certain confines. Otherwise, it gets, as she said, it just sort of goes everywhere.
Right.
But if you force yourself to write within those constraints, I think it's very good for self learning. I've written sonnets and I've written haiku and I've written ghazals and things. But sometimes, I don't know, do you believe that one should just stay within those bounds or be well practiced and be aware of the limitations or whatever the constraints of English writing, poetry writing, and then move as art has, as everything else has, moving beyond those constraints into another kind of...
But Mehvash, you have to know the rule to flout it.
I totally agree with that.
I absolutely agree with that. You see, people talk about T.S. Eliot flouting, the conventions of English literature and open verse, his love song of Alfred Prufrock, etc. But you forget all the work that went into it. And look at Ezra Pound. I mean, the way he looks at Chinese poems and the way he converts them into his own cantos, it's remarkable. And you can only do that when the form becomes secondary. It remains there, as Horace put it, it remains there, but it transcends it. So if you look at the successful sonnets of Petrarch, Spenser, Milton, Shakespeare, and 20th century W.H. Auden, you don't get that feeling that, it's irrelevant or the form is confining. In fact, I argue the reverse. I always say that these so-called forms, which confine some, are actually liberating you. Because once you have the forms under control, then you know exactly what emotion should be translated into what form. Should it be free verse? Should it be blank verse? Should it be a sonnet? Should it be a lyric? Should it be a villanelle? What should it be?
But is that a conscious decision that you make?
I think it's partly conscious, but it's partly the emotion that needs to be translated is dictated by that as well. So it's a happy mix. A successful sonnet is when the two meet together without one overriding the other.
Right.
So, it has that approach. You talked about breaking form, and Mehvash talked about the painters. Yes, Picasso. But have you seen Picasso's drawing of a crow at the age of 7?
Yeah.
What I mean
It's
to say is
realistic.
that you
I
have
would want to bring
construct
Marianne into
something
the conversation.
Sorry.
Because, no, I mean, what have been your influences?
My influences?
No, Marianne's.
I just said what my influences.
In what respect?
In influence, I mean, what kind of poets or poetry influenced you when you were beginning to write? Or they still have an influence on you?
Well, I mean, I don't think it makes sense to do name dropping here now. I think I'm influenced as I go, as Orhan Pamuk yesterday said something very true, that as a writer you have to choose very consciously what you are reading because you don't have all the time in the world, to read everything. And so, unfortunately, that, goes for me as well. I have to choose what I'm reading, and also I have to, choose the times that I'm reading, because if I read something that influences me too much, I will read the style in my own writing later. So what I do is I usually read books that are kind of like surrounding the topics that I'm working on. Like now I'm writing a novel that is set in Armenia, and it's about also because it's a very patriarchal, misogynistic society there. So I'm reading books on feminism, on like contemporary feminist books that deal with, motherhood and with pregnancy and how that plays out. So I think it's good to, you have to confine yourself in a way in what you are reading. And I think, as far as influence goes, we have this canon that we read at school in Austria, and of course I've read those things. I really love Goethe. It's a classic, but I really, really adore his writing. But I'm always really happy to discover contemporary voices from other countries. I really love writings from people who write, who come from another country but then write in a different language. Like there is the German poet Marica Potrocic, and she is from Croatia, but she writes in German, and her books are divine because she has like a way of writing in German that a German-speaking person cannot. Because, she kind of grew into the language, but she comes from another language. So that's something I'm interested in.
I wanted to add something to what you were saying, Athar, which was that one of the new developments in poetry is the ghazal in English, which has been taught now for decades in America and which has become part of the American canon. And one of our local poets, well, diaspora, but who grew up here and went to college here also, and she writes ghazal in English. Shadabs Istashmi. So, there are all those returning to traditional forms, but using them in a modern manner in a different language.
Very famous Kashmiri poet,
Shahid Ali. He's the person who actually spearheaded that movement.
Yes, he did.
And I would also like to add that it's not, for me personally, it's not only books that inspire me, I'm very inspired by life and by other art forms. Like if I go and see a painting, or if I listen to an extraordinary piece of music, that inspires my writing, sometimes more than other words, because it's, words are like on the same level. But for me, writing is a very intuitive thing, and so all these other sentiments they go into my writing, and so
I would like to just add that all of us sitting here, we have our language is something other than the one we are conversing in, and we are Urdu speaking, she's German speaking, and yet we've all chosen to write in English. And so what part do other languages? I know for her it's also French, and but when with you, for example, and I know you write in Urdu as well. How does I'm just wondering, how does another language influence what one writes in English?
I think it's the reading that influences basically what you. You see these. That's why I asked Athar Bhai that Athar Tahir Sahab, that is that a conscious decision? Do you actually genre? Picking up a genre is a conscious decision or not? And Afshan can also add here, or choice of language, is that a conscious decision? We have had these conversations, Muniz Apa sitting here, over years, but some of these questions remain unresolved, because if living in a multilingual society, it really becomes how much of that decision is conscious and how is a part of your you're brought up.
Yes.
So we don't. So Afshan, why did you choose to write in English? And do you also write in other languages, or do you read in other languages, or it is just one, basically English in which you read and write?
Well, I don't have a lot of knowledge of other languages, but recently I have found Punjabi and Urdu coming into my verse. Mostly
Words?
Into my verse.
Into.
But I mostly prefer writing in a kind of disruption. I prefer to disrupt the form. And I do like to see the stanza broken up. I do like to insert line breaks. I like to see the musicality, the traditional musicality of verse, broken up. That's how I find my verse to be authentic.
Right.
So I think that that's a very fertile thing to do as a poet, because I think it really does open up, it accesses certain parts of your mind, the unconscious, the subconscious, in the way in which perhaps traditional forms will not. And you perhaps find yourself actually creating a new innovative form of language. So that's what I mostly do. Yes.
Athar Sahab, do you need to actually practice or write in traditional forms before moving on to breaking the traditional forms, or you can still do it?
I would like to think that if a person wants to write something, I'd like to think that if a person, let me take the example of music. If you want to play a violin, You have to spend hours and hours on the violin to understand it. If you want to dance, you have to practice for hours and hours in order to dance well. It's the same thing with poetry. Unfortunately, we tend to be a bit lazy about it. But you have to practice your forms. You have to know your words. You have to know what words flash and what are the subtexts in the words when they're strung together. You have to know how they function when they are placed next to each other. And you have to feel it. If you don't feel the passion of the words, then what you're writing is fine, but it lacks an additional dimension which all great poetry should have. Why do we still read Keats? I mean, if I read Ode to the Nightingale today, it still sends goose pimples up my spine. I mean, it's such a profound work of art. And look at the rhyme scheme and look at the syllabic count. It's absolutely confined to a formula which is set. Every stanza conforms to that, you see. So you have to practice. If you get away with free verse or get away with what you feel, your emotions are reflected, fine. That too is poetry. But in order to really become a committed and a dedicated poet, you have to attack the forms.
I
think that provides you the frame, because I remember Italo Calvino saying once that in art as well as in literature, function of the frame is fundamental, because that separates you from the rest.
Only because, T.S. Eliot was so good at what he did, could he break the form? And when he broke the form, he was following the French symbolists. Because they had broken the form earlier. If you look at Picasso, he could play around with abstraction and semi-abstraction because he knew what realism was.
But
you create your own frame also at times, like Afshan was saying.
Could I say something?
Please.
But some of these people, the ones we are quoting here, were great minds. They wrote beautifully. So the form, it's, I agree that you have to, when you study them, it's not just the form that you're studying, because their whole thing, their metaphors, their similes, their thought processes, maybe if they had lived in this century, they would have been as good poets. I mean, you're looking at all the great minds. And if you talk about every poet sort of restricting himself to, say, the sonnet or the known sort of forms, perhaps it doesn't work out that way. I mean, although I do agree that you have to know it in order to move on then.
You're absolutely
and
right.
then reconstruct.
Everybody has to choose his own form. Everybody has to choose what appeals to him or her. That's true.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to request all of the panelists to actually share some of their work.
How much time do we have?
Maybe, 1 or 2 poems, perhaps we can share, so that people get a taste of what is being written and contemporary writing, how it sounds.
Should we start?
So we can start from Marianne. There's no order. I'm just sort of, I'll just.
My poems are really short. So the question is one. I can read a few. They're very short. As you can see, I don't care about form too much. I agree with my neighbor that, I learned form in school and it's important to learn it, but for my own self-expression, I would feel very restricted if I had to write sonnets all the time. So these are translated and we are still working on the translation. I'm going to read, I published 2 poetry books, and one is called Harlots in the Heart. It's this one. It's a book about love. It's love poems, basically English and German, and I will read some of these as well. Because it's maybe interesting for you to hear because German and English are from the same language family, so they go together really well. And the other one I'm gonna read 2 or 3 of is called in this language Whale Song, and it's poems about a self that is on a volcanic island, and the island kind of works as a mirror for the poetic self. So the first cycle is about the island of Sicily in Italy, where there is a big volcano, and it's about an amour fou that kind of went wrong. and the other one cycle is set in Iceland, and it's about loneliness. So we'll see how the translations go.
But you've got 5 minutes.
That's okay. You will see they're
I'm
very
afraid,
short.
I'm afraid I'll interrupt. If,
That's
because,
okay.
we have to,
I mean, I think I should give some context.
Please, please.
Otherwise
yes.
it doesn't
yes,
work.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Forever I wait in this head and this body for things to return to the north, where the feelings are colder, but also more concise. Here in this secret vessel of yearning, in this small ocean where love is greater and gaudier, and the volcano only the sediment of my desire, I wait for something that won't come, the quenching of light.
It's beautiful.
Glowing, my memory above these hills takes the light from the horizon. With the waxing of the moon, my premonition and suspicion grows that my term here is only for time fleeting, and the sea and the sun are but the whims of a summer bygone, a more captivating, a different one. In my contemplation of that which vanished, I keep a monogram hidden. It is my mind game's plaything. On this island I seek a new one. The concern of my own name I have long forgotten.
Beautiful.
Well, and then I'm just gonna read the German-English ones.
Sure.
Not take too much time. Okay. Maybe I'll read two quickly. One moment. Oh yeah, this one is nice. So these connect English lyrics from songs with German words. And this one is inspired by Leonard Cohen. Wähnst mich with Hungarian lanterns and photographs and gloss. Lehnst dich an mich in meine diagonale Denkverordnung. Mein Mund ist ein Schloss on the dew of your thigh. Du sehnst mich nach dir, auf leeren Seiten in a scrapbook, dich einzubinden. I have always touched your perfect body with my mind. Du entziehst dich jenen, die dich suchend finden, sagen, I'll do anything you ask me to, and if you want another kind, entwirfst du neue Szenen, mondän dahingeworfene Moränen einer Nacht. I tried to leave you, sagst du, doch es gibt keinen Grund dafür. Your beauty and the moonlight overthrew me.
It's beautiful. Such melody.
Yeah. Should I read one more?
Please.
Okay, last one.
Please,
This is
please.
my favorite poem of this book, and it's inspired by Nick Cave. Weil du mit mir like an idea von Sternenstaub umgeben liegst, in 20,000 days on earth, hence everything's collapsing here. Weil du mein Herz in Zeit und Raum und Grau und Blau verstreichen lässt, all stars get lost all day and night, painting my sleep with colors bright, scarlet for you and pink for me, and then they die mysteriously. Weil deine Hände Kompass sind, light filled with right and mystery. Zigeunerblut verlangt nach Meer in seas of sage and seas of storm. Dein Sanftmut ist voll Dunkelheit. My kiss will jumble you tonight.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Afshan Shafi. Yeah.
Yes. This poem is about toxic masculinity. A fuckboy amongst the daisies. I see you at 7, tugging a pink bow tie which your mother had fastidiously bound around your neck. I see how daffodil supple you were, a waxen query against sullen Athar. When he beat you, her other half, a procurer of glistening foreheads and dank wrists. It was hard not to blame her 3 days of seclusion, truffed buttercup sheets, and the drawn saddle off her back. Counting flints, icy rosettes in a dark puddle of exhalation. Wait just one second. You couldn't convalesce thus, twinkling meagerly at the spines of doorways, gulping silver rivets down your throat. I see now his hand at the back of your neck, as if brushing with a quill a lion's fulsome coronet, a mane around which he drew the frantic muscle of stallions, saints, and worn rioters.
Would you like to read one more?
I only have this one.
Okay, thank you very much. Athar Tahir sir,
I'm going to read a
what a
sonnet.
privilege to have you here this morning.
It's very kind of you, Khalique. I'm going to read my sequence of sonnets. There's 3, I think, in the 5 minutes. A sonnet for most of us to refresh their minds is a 14-line poem. Each line is decasyllabic, that means it has 10 syllables, and it has to have a regular rhyme scheme. You can play around with the rhyme scheme, but you can't play around with the decasyllables or the 14 lines, although some have tried. So the rhyme scheme tends to be Petrarchan, the way Petrarch did it, Spencerian, the way Spencer did it, Shakespearean, the way Shakespeare did it. And then, of course, you have people like Auden and people like the Romantics, who were also writing sonnets, but using their own rhyme schemes. So I've played around with the rhyme scheme, but kept the structure of 10 syllables and 14 lines intact. The first poem I'm going to read is about my childhood. I grew up in Penang, a small island off the coast of Malaysia, and I returned to it 40 years later. So it is a double vision poem. It's a mix of what a child saw, everything seemed big and many, and what an adult 40 years later revisiting the place sees. Sonnet 82, Penang. I have walked into a familiar place where one mango tree still stands, but I see 2. Coconut trees lankily stir the breeze, and the tamarind pods dangle high, now just beyond reach. And a dragonfly breaks the equator sun to transfer more past of the land. Years simplify, once a football field to a lawn, murmur something of father, mother, and sister, and younger sounds that no longer reply to a recall I would, so late, prefer under this a sweltering sour sky. Can anything be really revived? Can anything be really revived? Here I've come again, but not arrived. The second one is about paradise. Sonnet 81, Jahannam, which is Jahannam. It has Hebrew origin, the word in Urdu and Arabic. Jahannam. Many rewarding tales were spun to tell of heaven. One such has rivers unseen flowing beneath gardens, and fruits that swell and sweeten in the not time, not seasons, green silk garments and rich rugs, where all is well and in plenty, where all remain serene. On a grander scale, some painted their hell people by formulations of the unseen and imagined combinations that dwell where dark, mean, and obscene are serpentine. Arranged obscurities ache and repel, and mad odor of senses sets the scene. What Jahannam or heaven? Parallel to love, the mind is the ultimate hell. And this is a love poem, a love perceived through the 5 senses. Sonnet 84. As sound, it can bring tears to dry eyes, like the muezzin's call before daybreak, or a Gregorian chant with its highs, or the heartache notes cello strings awake. As touch, it revives lost passion, defies shaking hands and weakening knees to take what it can of the moment, It denies all passing and prompts motions limbs may make. As taste, it can be settled or intent on exploring or searching for something. As fragrance, it can waft renewed content through aging veins for a last spell of spring. But as a visual, it's most potent to initiate my slow undoing.
Beautiful. Mehvash.
Okay, like Marianne, I'm going to read a poem which has got more than one language in it. And I have studied French, and that has, I studied it at the Sorbonne, so that has always, I've written poems separately in French. And this is kind of an amalgamation of 2 or 3 languages. So bear with me. It's called I Revolt. It's about rebellion. So 1, the rebellion of lemons because they were not born pomegranates is understandable. Because pomegranates have fleshy seeds and poetic skin and a crown, while you, lemon, have thin seeds and bitter skin, no surge of yellow geezering on your head. So I understand your revolt, but it does not matter, lemon. Things are just that way, and your rindy skin can be consumed, and your bitterness is more memorable than the cinch of crenulated color on pomegranate's head. For what is a crown anyway but a thing everyone wants to strip you of? 2. Pero tú sabes, la rebelión renate hoy, which means, but you know, revolt is reborn today. That rebellion of green things that will take over, hadn't you heard? Also, the revolt of sand that stares with mica eyes at those tall towers of concrete glass flash. It squints at them, then laughs a susurrus laugh as it slips and slides closer, knowing that centuries from now, the rebellion of these buildings will be a memory, just a memory in its slipping, sliding, burning mind. 3. Now remember that brief moment when a body leaves water and heaviness shoots upwards to legs, arms, torso. That is the defiance of gravity, reclaiming that body as its own leaden vehicle. Then gone the lightness of watery thoughts. 4. आज बगावत ने सर उठाया फिर कि मौत धूल उठाती है जवानी पर. But child, understand that the ultimate revolt is that of life. It still goes on in bedrooms and bazaars, not caring really about death clocking in every day, hour, second. It forces babies to push out, not accepting death's signature, just cancelling it out like a bad check. Not looking too long at that cadaver in the soil, more interested really in the food at the wake. Ah, la révolte des fleurs qui meurt dans la vase est enfin supprimée par la révolte des fleurs qui s'ouvre chaque jour. Which means the revolt of flowers dying in the vase is finally subsumed by the revolt of flowers that bloom every day.
Beautiful. And finally, Ilona.
So this one is called Untitled. Amorphous love came to me one morning, disembodied fragment, wisp of an idea, celestial vision, infinite, perfect. The songs I sing are for you, my love. Lying against you in the intimate dark, I know this strength, this force from which I draw my being, the well at which I slake my thirst. But is there a moment where it fails, this thing, love, this entity, abstraction? Or does it live, tenuous, submerged, leviathan, at the molten core? Momentarily, I hate you with every fiber, as the standing hair on a cat's back, as the wind that would push uprooted trees past the edge of the cliff. Breathe, past the edge, wisp, sing. Thank you. And this is called "This Is How I Want to Ride It." There's a little bit of background here because, first of all, I love to drive and I love to drive fast. And the other thing is that as a child, I was very lazy and I learned to play the piano, and I had initially a very bad teacher here and I never practiced. And then finally my mother found me a very good tutor. So the beginning is about the tutor because he taught me many things. So this is how I want to ride it. Like Rex Manuel, dapper, short, shining, deeply dark, in a red cap and checked scarf, drummer and pianist from 30s Madras, who danced bandy-legged as he played, who taught me to strike chords with force and joy, sans looking, blind. This is how I want to ride it, focused, steady, fingers flicking switches, tight on turns against gears, feet rocking pedals, unity, control, motion, feeling it vibrate through me, this engine, energy. From the sides of my eyes, the landscape curving with the road or following straight for mile on mile. This is how I want to ride it. Slick, quick, eyeballing it, knowing it will stick. I've got it right. I've struck the apple at its heart.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have got 7 minutes to take, perhaps 9 minutes.
Aren't you going to
I suggest you read some.
But that will, I would rather not and have more questions.
One.
I think you should.
Read one.
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 Yeah, one.
So let me, right, very quickly then. But then you'll have one question less.
That's okay.
Let me just read, it's a poem titled The Palm Reader, Aleppo. It's about a palm reader in Aleppo. The palm reader, Aleppo. Slowly, the evening began to descend. No one survived in the neighborhood but the palm reader. He had squeezed himself under a large trunk of fresh potatoes when they came and opened fire. It was indiscriminate. After they left, he stepped out of the house to find himself alone among fresh corpses, in street and on door sill. The corpses will remain scattered till the following day. Neighborhood cordoned off. The enormity of death made him indifferent. He felt hungry, walked back home, took out some potatoes, boiled them unpeeled, sprinkled salt, ate. Bored with not feeling, doing, he slipped a torch into his pocket, stepped out of the house. He would read the palms of dead. That would take him through evening, night. Many palms to read, no fortunes to tell. Thank you very much. So we've got 7 minutes now really to take a few questions. If somebody has a question or a short, brief comment. Yeah, gentleman in the front row.
Thank you for a wonderful start to day two. My question is regarding the multilingual poetry that you've read today and spoken about as well. Since I know a little bit of German, so my question is to you, Marianne. This German grammar structure is very, very different in terms of the placement of the verbs. So when you are combining your verses together, what's the biggest challenge for you there, and what do you look for?
I look for rhyme, for rhythm mainly, and for feeling. I mean, for me, writing is like the game Tetris. Yeah, so it's like this. So I try to fit in words, and it's very intuitive. It's not really, it's as was said before, I think languages are felt, and I feel that, I think most authors write like intuitively and by feeling words, and so I just feel how words kind of click together, you know, and they work together, or they don't. And then English has much more words than German. So, you know, I can just use the dictionary and look up words, and I have a big variety of words, and then I just check with my translator if they fit. So, does that answer your question? Yeah, okay.
Yes, please.
As a complete layman who's never written a line of poetry but loved reading it, what would you like your poetry to be included in courses in schools and colleges and then dissected in different ways by students and teachers? Anyone can answer that. Would you like that?
We have a professor of literature sitting in our midst, so he can actually respond to that.
It's inevitable, because if you are going to pass on whatever legacy Anglophone literature has in Pakistan, it has to be part of the text. And I'm happy to say that one of the first poems that were part of the text were Toffee Crawford's, and he was taught at the secondary school level. But now you have a number of Pakistani poets who are being taught at both the local curriculum as well as O and A levels. They are part of the O and A level curriculum. So it's a start that gradually people are beginning to realize the creative work that has been done both by the pioneers of the 50s, 60s and 70s, as well as people who followed them.
So do you look forward to it, having your
One doesn't look
poetry
forward to
taught
it in the sense that one can't really look forward to it. It depends on the editor of the textbooks, you see. It's a good thing, but one can't really look forward to it because the initiative is not in our hands, it's in the hands of the editors.
But I think, speaking of, at the university level, in literature departments, it is being taught. Quite a lot of.
My question wasn't, is it being taught? Because I know you're all great poets, your poems will be included. But in the hands of teachers who may not understand or get your feelings, in the hands of students on whom it's enforced, strange things are done to poetry. So I was just wondering that part of
very,
it.
very pertinent.
Well, that's true, but I think they should then pick up hybrid tapestries and
Teachers
begin with
are
hybrid
not-
tapestries
yes.
and then, read individual works.
Teachers happen to be
Yeah.
there, asked to teach a particular
Dragonfly
poem.
in the sun.
So I was just wondering how it's ripped apart. Do you like the way it's analyzed?
Well, when it comes
We
to
are not
that-
in the classroom, so that's
Yeah.
fine.
I have
We
an
don't know.
anecdote there because I have a poem which is about hearing, okay? And when I read it once, somebody said to me, and she was a teacher, and she said, "Oh, now I know how the ear works." So, so I thought, oh dear, that was not the intention.
Yeah, that happens. No, you're right, absolutely. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add a point. It's not just poetry, but also literature. When it gets analyzed in the classroom or analyzed by critics, sometimes there's a subconscious thing that the poet or the writer brings into the text that the writer may not be aware of and that the critic or the teacher or the classroom might pick up. And it always reminds me of an elderly British writer called Naomi Mitchison, who said, "Oh dear," she said, "I met this young lady in America. She's analyzing my book, all sorts of things I had never thought of." So I don't know that, but that's how it works.
I mean, I would like to add that I think it's true that, once you wrote the book, it's going out there and it starts its own life in the world, and you cannot do anything about it, and hopefully people will understand it. But there might also be critiques and people who will not like it and who will, dissect it, and it's like, you just have to live with it.
Poetry is really, it starts from you, but once it's released on paper, it's the mind of the reader which also interacts with it, interfaces with it, and produces maybe something quite different. Doesn't have to be about bad teachers. It's just any human who picks up a piece of poetry or literature for that matter will have his own thing, because once you've written, you've released
It's a different lens.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Marianne, Afshan, Athar Tahir, Mehvash, Amin, and Ilona, Yusuf. Thank you all very much.